What is going on, everyone? Chris with Journals, Comics, and Pop Culture. I don't know about you all, but I constantly hear the phrase, the market will decide. Well, folks, today I'm here to tell you that that is not the case. We're going to dive deep into this topic of discussion that is another controversial discussion that is really going around right now, probably more than ever. This is a topic I've discussed in the past, but just with everything going on in recent news in light of certain comic books getting hot, I'm having this discussion again. If you guys aren't subscribed to the channel, please take the time to do so. We are on the road to 10,000 subscribers. When we get there, we're going to have a massive giveaway. Also want to give a big shout out to today's sponsor, PopCultureZone.com. Their links are below. Go check them out if you're interested in the hottest CGC and raw books, incentive variants, and so forth. And stay tuned to the end of the video to learn more about PopCultureZone.com. And lastly, before we get into the video, I will be having my first ever live sale on the Whatnot app. Follow me there at Journos Comics. Information is below. Anybody that makes a purchase on this Friday's show has an opportunity and automatically gets entered to win this beautiful, spectacular Spider-Man number 27, CGC 9.6 white pages. First Frank Miller on Daredevil. So again, that's this Friday, 6:30 Pacific time, 9:30 Eastern time. I do hope to see you all there. Give me a follow over there on Whatnot. Let's get into this topic of discussion. I recently did a video talking about what is the first real or true or whatever you want to call it appearance of Spider-Man 2099. You can go check that video if you haven't watched it yet. This is one that I feel is very murky. We know that ASM 365 is a preview of 2099 number 1, and a lot of people call 365 the first appearance, including CGC, CBCS, even Overstreet leans that way, and so forth. I don't necessarily pick one or the other. I do believe context matters. That's my argument there. But what happened when I started going over these two books and the controversy there is the thing that gets popped up anytime we talk about these controversial appearances. Let the market decide, or the market will decide. We see it with Hulk 180 and Hulk 181. There's countless out there. Gambit. Let the market decide. The market's going to decide, or the market has spoken. And what they mean by this, and what some of you mean by this is, well, whatever sells better on the market, whatever we as consumers demand on the market, that's basically the first appearance. Not true. I'm going to say it once, and I'll probably say it many times throughout this video. The market never decides labels. The market only decides value. Let me repeat myself. The market never decides labels. It simply decides value. Now, let's look at labels in the problematic state of how we label and define the labels for comic books such as the first appearances, cameo, full, preview, etc. There is a problem that is not really correlated into what the market does. And this problem is the fact that there is inconsistencies simply due to no industry-wide standard. People are arguing with me saying, well, Overstreet is that standard. No, they're not, though. They are not. They've set precedent, but as an industry, everyone, including the publishers, including CGC and CBCS and database apps like Go Collector, Key Collector, they don't look at Overstreet and say, whatever Overstreet says goes. The same goes with CGC. A lot of people think, well, CGC is the gold standard. Anything that CGC says on their labels, that's official. That's the standard. That's not the case, folks. And even so, every single one of these entities contradict themselves. There is contradictions within how Overstreet labels, although overall I think they could arguably be the most consistent. There are huge contradictions with CGC and CBCS. There are contradictions with Go Collect, and there are absolutely contradictions with Key Collector. I've made videos on those. There's a lack of consistency across the board. So because we don't have this ingrained law of rules, like a 10 commandments of what's considered a cameo, what's considered a full. Is this a preview or is it in story or what? There's not a 10 commandments dictating that. It sometimes gets murky. Now, labels do influence how we buy. So, like I said, some of us trust anything that CGC says. If CGC says that Spider-Man 2099 #1 isn't the first appearance of Miguel, and they say 365 is, I'm going with 365 just because of what CGC says. If Key Collector says Spider-Man 2099 #1 is the first appearance and that 365 is just a preview, I'm going after and believing whatever Key Collector says. There are people out there that do that, and it influences our purchasing decisions. Once our purchasing decisions are influenced, then that influences fair market value. It influences demand on the market. It influences the market. But again, the market doesn't dictate the labels. The labels are supposed to be merely a definition defining a characteristic of what's going on in that book. But again, that definition is not set in stone. But never has been the case when CGC has said, oh, let's see, cameo or full. Well, let's see what the market does. Let's see what buyers and collectors spend more on. So let's look at Uncanny Annual 14 and Uncanny 266. Let's see what collectors pay more for on the market. Oh, look at that. 266 is going for a higher value, so we're going to label that the first full appearance. Here you go, guys. The market decided. The market dictated. No, that's not how it works. That's not how it works. Oh, let's see, Hulk 180, Hulk 181. Well, let's see what the collectors are paying more for. Oh, they're paying more for Hulk 181. Let's label that the first full. Oh, collectors are paying, Overstreet didn't sit and say, oh, well, ASM 365 is going for more of a higher dollar amount than that Spider-Man 2099 #1. So I guess we got to label Amazing Spider-Man 365 the first appearance. And on the flip side of that, because, Key Collector is kind of challenging the issue with Spider-Man 2099, saying, look, it's often recognized that 365 is the first appearance, but it is a preview, and we're going to call 2099 #1 the first. They're not doing that because of anything that's going on the market. And I know a lot of you are going to have your conspiracies. Oh, they're sitting on 20 books of that 299 and they want to pump and dump them so they can make like a couple $100 in their pocket. Like, okay. Anyways, guys, I digress. Never in the history of this industry had an industry entity that labels comic books, whether it's Overstreet, CGC, CBCS, Go Collect, Key Collector, Marvel Wiki, Fandom, the publishers themselves. Never have they sat and said, I'm going to look at which book is going for more on the market, and I'm going to let that decide how I label my book. Nope, never. And that's the point I'm trying to make here. And I'm trying to be humble here, folks, but it boggles my mind how this is not understood. I literally have sit here and broke it apart and explained it in such detail, as to the point I can make it, and people still don't get it. Now, if your argument is, what's the better book to invest in, then let the market decide. That's completely different, though. Completely different. What's the better book to invest in? Let the market decide. Now, again, what influences the market? The labels. But the market doesn't dictate them. So I know that sometimes when it comes to the value of the book, it could be the chicken or the egg. Well, seems that this is labeled this way because the market does value it more, but it's just not the case. So let's go back. Let's go back to the early mid 70s and look at Hulk 180 and Hulk 181. The same people that argue, let the market decide, are the same people that have a misconception of what was going on back in the 70s. And that sit and argue in favor of the fact that Hulk 180 is the first true appearance of Wolverine. It was often cited that Hulk 180 was the first appearance of Wolverine because with the Overstreet, and back then all you really had was Overstreet, and that's why a lot of people use the Overstreet as that resource. But even leading up into the 80s, into the early 90s, people still often stated Hulk 180 to be the first appearance of Wolverine with no other context. Now that's not wrong, but context does matter because it is still a cameo. But back then, the context words such as cameo and full were around. They were around. You would often hear them in your LCSs. You would hear them from dealers and from collectors, but they were never officially utilized in any type of official capacity of labeling. So in the 70s, when these books hit the shelf in the years to follow, before the internet, before CGC, before much of anything outside of Overstreet, labeling Hulk 180 as the first appearance, people still went after Hulk 181. And it wasn't because, oh, well, the label says that Hulk 181 is the first full appearance or not. It's because the market values what they value regardless of labels in the first place at the core of collecting. People didn't care that Hulk 180 was labeled as this first appearance of this new character because he was still just on the last page of the book. But then the next book came out, and here you see him for the first time on the cover, and you see him for the first time fully in the story throughout the book. That's what they cared about. And that's why the labels evolved moving forward, because we realized that context mattered. And because now we live in the day of instantaneous information, we don't go and read the book off the newsstand first and find what we want intrinsically in these books. That's what collectors did back then because they didn't have the internet. They didn't have CGC and all these crazy sources feeding us information. We went to the books and said, okay, regardless of label, I only see this guy on the back page. I want that next book where he's on the cover and fully in the book. Now, though, we do look to the labels. There's a lot of books that collectors haven't opened up. And we go on Key Collector, or we utilize CGC labels. We utilize Overstreet still, Go Collect. And we do our research and want to find out, well, what's the first appearance of this character? Is it a cameo or a full? Because we value the intrinsic value of what those labels mean. So ultimately, you can say that the opposite thing has been going on with the labels. Because Amazing Spider-Man 365 has been labeled as the first appearance. That is why the book is more now. Because we're not reading the books first. We're not understanding the context. We're just going off of the label. And if the label doesn't give the totality of the context, where CGC, CBCS, and all these other resources, all they say is first appearance of Spider-Man 2099. They don't say in preview. They don't say anything like that. So if you're a new collector or you're not savvy to this character, you're not going to know it's a preview of another book that's coming out a month later. So when you open it up and you see that that character isn't in the main story and it's just a sneak peek, maybe you're going to be like, well, that's not... Yeah, I thought it was like a first appearance in the actual story of the book. Context matters. And now it's not the market that is deciding. It's the labels that are deciding because they're influencing how we purchase our comic books. So hypothetically, If there were no labels out for these two books, the ASM 365 and 2099 #1, if there was no Key Collector, no CGC, no Overstreet, tell me, which one do you think might be valued more? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't. Because ASM 365 is still a cool book. It's an anniversary book. It's the cool holographic cover, origin retold. I don't know. I can't tell you. But there is a possibility that for those that went after Miguel O'Hara, 2099 Spider-Man, they could have put more value and more demand into Spider-Man 2099 #1 if we weren't utilizing these labels as an influencer to how we purchase and speculate and invest in our comic books. So, to wrap this up, I'm going to say it one more time. This isn't an argument of what truly is a first appearance or not. I'm beyond that. I think the Spider-Man 2099 issue is very problematic. I side with Key Collector in the sense of the context. The context only. I think there needs to be more context for both books. If you want to label 365 as the first appearance, whatever, but you have to admit that it's inconsistent. Because there are other books out there, like the Strange Academy previews, that don't get labeled the first appearance of these new characters when it's the same thing as what's going on in ASM 365. You have to admit that there's inconsistencies, but call it a first appearance or not, I don't care. That's not what this is about. The bottom line, the market will never dictate labels. Never. Labels are created by definition or the industry entities and how they interpret those definitions. Nobody, I'm going to repeat one more time before I end this video. No industry entity is ever saying, well, what are customers doing with their money? That's how I'm going to label this book. What book is selling for more? That's how I'm going to label this book. Never. The market doesn't dictate labels, doesn't decide labels. It simply decides value of the book. That's my video for today, everyone. Leave your thoughts in comments below. Be kind, be respectful, of course. And as always, thank you for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't done so. Before we go, as I said, again, big shout out to popculturezone.com. Stay tuned for a short little clip to learn more about who they are and what they do. Until next time. PopCultureZone.com is an online shop focusing on hot new comics, including exclusive and incentive variants, CGC graded comics, and tons of other inventory, including pop culture toys and other collectibles, all at low and competitive prices. PopCultureZone.com ships all over the US, and if you are buying raw comics, they offer flat rate shipping of only $4.99. That's right, $4.99. Absolute craziness, right? And there's no taxes included, excluding New Jersey. Pop Culture Zone is also on eBay, where they hold a 100% positive feedback rating with over 8,000 completed transactions for this year alone. Make sure to check out the link to their website below, as well as their eBay link, so be sure to give them a follow there as well.